The media for a little bit. When we had Helen Clark on the show, we asked her whether she thought that the New Zealand Herald was biased against Labour. Do you think the New Zealand Herald, and indeed media in general, is biased against this government?
I think most of the print media would, generally speaking, tend to take a more conservative view. They would tend to lean a bit towards the right politically, if you like. And that's not necessarily a conscious thing. I think you just look over a very long period of time, that's where the New Zealand print media have tended to be positioned. Radio, I think, covers the spectrum in many regards. A lot of talkback radio is sort of populist right-wing.
No.
It's not kind of ideological right-wing stuff. It's more the kind of populist end of the right-wing spectrum, but with some commentators are more kind of left or liberal end. Television, I think, funnily enough, television tends to position itself, particularly TVNZ, to be against the government, whoever the government is. I don't regard TVNZ as biased against Labour. I think it has a tendency to want to be against the government, to be kind of critical positioning, no matter who the government is.
Is that a knee-jerk reaction to being an SOE?
I think it's almost unconscious compensation for the fact that they're a state-owned organisation. I don't think it's even something which goes through people's minds. They see themselves as having a role, which is a very traditional role for the media, of being, if you like, society's critic, of saying, you know, well, the government says this, but what's the truth? And that tends to lead them into a sort of unnecessary cynicism, I think, and summed up actually not by TV1 but by TV3 when Duncan Garner said the default position of politicians is to lie. Well, actually, that's not my experience, no matter who I'm talking about, whether it's Labour or National or New Zealand First or whoever politicians we're talking about. I don't think that's actually true. One could easily say the default position of some journalists is to distort and to exaggerate.
Maybe
I don't think it helps us saying those kinds of things, actually.
Maybe we could say that the default position of most MPs is to swerve.
I think most politicians are in a business where you're trying to attract public support, and the truth is that sometimes the public doesn't want to hear the 100% truth.
When you say
that's more the reality that I think politicians often have to cope with.
When you say that the print organisations lean to the right, why is that? Is that just because of the journalists they've got on board, or is that because of the owners of those print organisations?
I'm not even sure whether it's any of those things. I think there's been a tradition in New Zealand particularly that the media, the print media, tends to be somewhat towards the right end of the spectrum, and some provincial newspapers well to the right end of the spectrum. In the metropolitan papers, rather less so, rather more towards the centre. And that's not always true of all of their journalists, obviously, because there are a range of opinions which are expressed within the major newspapers. The columnists in the Herald or the Dominion or the Christchurch Press don't all express the same view. There's not a kind of identikit view, and you'll find differing views expressed within the same issue of a newspaper.
You have more media advisors and communications people than any other government in New Zealand history. How could you get so off message with the electorate when you're spending so much on trying to get on message?
I don't think we're off message. I think what it is we're a third-term government. And the longer a government runs, the more people get into a mode of behaviour or thinking which is really a kind of fairness principle. I mean, to some extent, that's what we're battling in this election this year.
So the electorate has just grown, they've just stopped listening to a third-term government?
It's not so much they've stopped listening. I think it's more a kind of feeling that, OK, well, Helen and company, they've had their turn at the bat. Here's young John, he's been waiting there for a go. Isn't it high time that he got the bat?
He's been waiting there for 3 minutes.
It's a kind of beach cricket sort of approach to life, you know, give Johnny a turn. And people bank what the government's done. I mean, the irony is that, with one or two exceptions, that people, by and large, majority of people, like the things this government has done. I mean, they like KiwiSaver, they like the super fund.
But they don't like that you've let prostitutes have rights, and they don't like that gays are allowed to marry people, and they don't like that you're not allowed to hit your kids anymore, because if I want to hit my kid, I should.
That's an interesting one, because one of the sort of things that you hear coming back is the nanny state, and we're telling people what they must do.
Yes.
Well, you pick some of those issues. One of those is the issue of civil unions and rights for homosexual people. That's not telling people what they can do. It's allowing some people to be who they are and saying to other people, in fact, you're not allowed to stop people being who they are because they don't impact upon your freedoms.
But you can throw all the logic to me you like. I'm just going to counter it with it's PC nonsense.
Well, I actually don't think that is PC
I know
nonsense.
It's not, but that's what the public...
And certainly the stuff around smacking, the then existing law didn't say you could smack kids no matter what. There was a defence of reasonable force, if you like, for disciplinary purposes. The current law doesn't make it absolutely legal to exercise some discipline over children, but you go whacking a kid with some, mallet or a great big whip or something, then you're going to get up in front of the court if somebody knows about it and the evidence is there, and so you should be, because that kind of behaviour only encourages the cycle of violence, and we, like most other Western societies, are far too violent a society.
What's Labor's vision?
Our vision is a society where everybody's got the chance to realise their full potential. I mean, that's been the Labor Party vision for decades and decades and decades, and it remains that. All the rest of the stuff, trying to build a high-tech economy, lifting our living standards, is all part of that. It's not the end in itself. The vision is people being able to realise their full potential, to be satisfied, to be fulfilled as New Zealanders living in New Zealand. And for some New Zealanders, that sometimes means going overseas for a period of time, as I did when I was in my early 20s, as John Key did for many years, in fact, from his 20s onwards.
Yes, no, I asked him about that. Now, moving on to something completely different, let's be frank, because it's the name of the show. Are we sucking up to the Chinese over Tibet?
No, we're not. We've in fact taken quite a firm stand in relation to Tibet. We've called for conciliation, negotiations, if one likes, between the government in Beijing and spokespeople for the Tibetan people. We believe that the rights of the Tibetan people are recognised in terms of their cultural identity is important. But like all governments around the world, we do not say that Tibet is an independent state. We recognise Chinese suzerainty over Tibet. We do not support violence, and the information coming through suggests that there was a good deal of violence against ethnic Chinese in what happened in Tibet. The Dalai Lama condemned that violence, as he opposed any violence by the Chinese authorities. And we said we should not use excessive violence in response, that there should be proportionate response if there is violence coming through from some people in Tibet. And that was a strong position. Our ambassador made that position clear to the Chinese government. The Chinese government was not exactly pleased to hear that message from us, as it wasn't from a number of countries around the world.